Good morning, Rechavia Nachlaot in Yerushalayim. Thank you so much for joining us. And now we're going to continue with Perek Mem Aleph, chapter 41 in the Tanya. The last couple of lessons we've been learning about the idea how someone through Avodat Hashem, through service of Hashem, how it's possible for someone to be dedicated and all selfless to Hashem, that Hashem is able, Hashem and His spirituality is the main part, and we are only trying to be part of Hashem's master plan as it's supposed to be as far as avodah, service of Hashem, avodat Hashem. So if you have the regular Tanya, please turn to the second page of the Perek Mem Aleph. It says over here, page 112. And the comparison that the Alter Rebbe talks about is the comparison with an individual to Hashem's kingdom as a king, Malchut Shamayim, accepting upon oneself the yoke of Hashem. That is a classical example of avodah, of service, avodat Hashem, service of Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe quotes the verse, Som tasim alecha melech, that we need to place upon ourselves a king. That placing upon ourselves a king means taking upon ourselves the sovereignty of Hashem, and mainly the awesomeness, the eimah, the fear of Hashem, and that helps us, that keeps us in line, that we do not rebel for the Holy King, for Kadosh Baruch Hu. And then it's called Avodah Shlema. So let's start the last word of the second to last line in the text. Umachamat, and since we have Hamshachat Hayirah, drawing down the fear of Hashem upon ourselves, Shebemocho, that's in a person's mind, in a person's thought, Nikraot b'shem avodah shlema. This is called a complete, sincere avodah, sincere service of Hashem. Top of the next page, Kechol avodat ha'eved la'adono u'malko. Just like every service of a servant to his master and his king. Masha'in ken, on the other hand, im lomed umekayem hamitzvah, if a person learns Torah and fulfills the mitzvah, be'ahava levada, only with love alone, missing the fear, missing the missing the so to speak, a distance, the awesomeness, realizing the awesomeness of Hashem. If you only do ahava levada, only serve Hashem out of love, kedei ledavka bo, in order to cleave yourself onto Hashem, al yedei torato u'mitzvotav, through learning Hashem's Torah and observing His mitzvot, in that case, einan nikret b'shem avodat ha'eved. That is not called real service of a slave, of a servant of Hashem. V'haTorah amra, and the Torah said, Va'avadetem et Hashem Elokechem, and you should serve Hashem your God, v'gomer, etc. In another verse it says, V'oto ta'avodu, and you should serve Hashem, v'gomer, etc. So since the Torah says that we have to serve Hashem, like avodat Hashem, when you connect to someone out of ahava, out of love, then you don't have this characteristic of service, so to speak. He says, for example, that when do you have service? Like a slave to his master or to the king. These are two types of service that a person, examples of service that we know. First of all, a slave to his master. We don't really have today a real slave labor, but in third world countries, in Mitzrayim, you have real slave labor. We had, Am Yisrael had back then. And so, understand that when a person is really a slave, like the stories that we've heard from the past, then the person doesn't have really any being for themselves. their entire being is their master's. So, for example, just like the master owns a home, and the master owns books, and the master owns a computer, literally also owns a slave. Today, we don't have this kind of... We have someone that works, and they have their own life, and they come, they work for a few hours. But a real slave is where a person is totally given over to the master. Like there's a phrase in the Talmud, Kol masha kana eved kana rabo. Everything that the slave acquires, automatically his master acquires. Why? The slave can say, what do you mean? I am my own person, I bought it, and I have my own phone, and my own belongings, my own purse, or my own shoes. It's mine. I happen to work for you for a few hours or for several years. No. A real slave is someone who is totally... it's almost like he does not have his own being. He does not have... It's almost like he doesn't have his own entity, his own feelings. The master owns the slave and owns many other things also. So in that scenario, the slave does not have almost any personality for himself. His whole being is dedicated, he is selfless, and he is committed to the master. True, the master needs to treat him properly, but whatever the master wants, that's what the slave needs to do. Now the Alter Rebbe also mentions in the top line of page Nun Zayin, he says, just like a servant to the master, umalko, and to someone's king. Now that's a different type of slave. Over here we're talking about potentially a minister or someone that works in the royal palace for the king. So there are different levels within service, but already not the same type of service as a slave. Because a slave, as we said earlier, totally does not have their own being. Now we're going to another type of servant. The best way to explain to you is by saying the other extreme. You have ministers, the minister of defense, you have the minister of finances, you have the minister of health, and so on and so forth. Now, these ministers are serving the king. The king, we're not talking about a president or a prime minister. We're talking about a king, where the king in his royal palace, his word, that's what goes. And no one dares say anything besides what the king says. Now this service of the king is a different characteristic, different style than being a slave. If you want to be a minister, you have to be a thinker. You have to present in front of the king your research that you've compiled together, and then the king perhaps gives the final stamp of approval. But over here, you're talking already about someone who is not just yapping away and just saying whatever, repeating whatever the master says, or doing whatever the master says without having their own input. Over here, by the king, you have the smarter the person is, the higher the level of the person, of the mission, of the job is. And so the person can be in very high ranks serving the king, but you need to have his input. So that's already a different type of service. That's not the type of service of where there's an individual who is almost like brainless, feelingless, doesn't have his own entity, just whatever the king says, that's what he does. Over here we're going to a different type, a different class. It's a service of dedication. It's a service of of commitment, and a service of using your own initiative in order to magnify the presence of the king in the country. And so, in short, we have two types of service: the service of a slave and the service of a minister. The common denominator between the two is that they're both service. True, they're both different types of service of the king, but the common denominator is that they are both subservient. They are both their mission, their purpose in being in this scenario, either with a master or with a king, is that they need to please the king or the master. Each one in a different way, sometimes very different, but still they both called avodah. And that's why the Alter Rebbe says that this is called avodah shlema, a complete, sincere avodah, just like any servant for the master or for the king. All of the above is yirah. They're all different ways of us understanding the concept of fear of Hashem. Ahava, love and affection to Hashem, is a totally different type of acting. It's a totally different character. It's a character. It's a feeling of closeness. You wouldn't say that the slave feels any type of closeness to the master. On the contrary, you wouldn't say that even a minister or someone that works in the royal palace. I'm not talking about prime minister or king or presidents. I'm talking about a king. Apparently, when it comes to the king, everyone, in a sense, everyone needs to feel totally selfless to the king. The question is, does the individual mix in their own emotion, their own mind, their own initiative, or are they totally almost like brainless, thoughtless, feelingless? But perhaps there is a little bit of more of a closeness, but love and affection for the king, I believe that even the greatest ministers do not have. In one moment, the king can dismiss them, can even send them to the gallows or to the lion's den. And so they need to be super, super careful. This is very similar to what the mashal, the metaphor, it says in the Medrash about a king once came to one of his cities. He made a surprise visit. And he came with his whole entourage, with all the ministers. And everyone had a choice to be able to say, I want to have this minister to be part of my family, to be part of my circle. One person said, I want the minister of finances, because he figured, I'll be rich. Next person said, I want the minister of health, because he figured, I want to have the best connections, the best medical connections. The other person said, I want to have the minister of defense. Each one said, I want this minister to stay in my home. I want to have the best connections to this specific minister. Then the Medrash says, then came Pikeach Echad, came one wise person. And this person said, Ana, this is a quote in Aramaic from the Medrash. Ana Nasiv Malka. I want the king himself. And the Medrash explains, and in Chassidus it elaborates, how this individual was so wise. The kulhu mischalfin, because all of the different levels of ministers in one moment can be changed, can be replaced. But there's one individual who can never be replaced, and that's the king himself. And the king himself obviously refers to Hashem, and the other ministers refer to in the explanation of the metaphor. The other ministers are the different galaxies that Hashem has created in order to give us the sun and the moon and heat and all different things in the world through which Hashem influences the world. And those nations that chose to serve the different the sun or the moon or other parts of the world, they didn't realize that those are only funnels. Those are only Hashem can change them. Hashem controls them. Hashem Himself, obviously, lo mitchalef. Hashem never has changed. So this emphasizes the concept that the king is the king and everybody has to be totally subservient. There is not a true feeling of love and affection between the ministers and the king himself. So the common denominator which we're trying to emphasize over here is the avodah, the service. Whether you want to call it slave work or you want to call it service, but they're both included in the Hebrew word of avodah, which is based on the root word of eved, ayin vet dalid, eved, service. And so this is a service which Hashem expects of us, as the Alter Rebbe quotes, Va'avadetem et Hashem Elokechem. You should serve Hashem your God. In other words, it's not enough to have just ahava, love. It's wonderful, it's exciting, it's connecting, but it's missing. If it's only ahava, then it's missing the avodah. It's missing the service of Hashem. It says ve'otota avodu, and this is what it says in the first. If we turn back one page to the beginning of chapter Mem Aleph, so he says in the fourth line, Afal pikein lo dai. This is like the introduction to the chapter. Lo dai la'orer ha'ava levada leva'aseh tov. This is the key. This is the thread through which the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss throughout the entire chapter, that it's not enough to awaken just the ahava, just the love. There needs to be a balance of the yir'ah tiv'it, of the natural fear which Hashem has implanted within each and every one of us towards Hashem. So another way of saying fear is avodah. Avodah, the service of Hashem. This is a great way for us to explain the concept of avodah, of service of Hashem. Another good way to explain the idea of service is with the concept of tefillah. Based on these verses that the Alter Rebbe quotes, the Gemara says, Eizo hi avodah shebalev, avodah. Va'avadetem et Hashem, we say in the Shema, in the second portion, Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavchem v'chol nafshechem. You have to serve Hashem with all your heart and soul. What do you mean to serve Hashem with your heart? Eizo hi avodah shebalev, zu tefillah. That refers to prayer. That refers to davening. When we daven to Hashem, we stand in front of Hashem like a servant to their master. The main part of tefillah, yesterday we talked about the biblical meaning of tefillah, and that is that is any time a person is in need, we have a mitzvah from the Torah to turn to Hashem and pray to Hashem. Turn from the bottom of your heart and pray to Hashem. That's the biblical mitzvah. Now, when it comes to davening from the siddur, what's the main part of tefillah? That's the Shmona Esrei. That's the peak of tefillah is the Amidah. All of the tefillah beforehand is only leading up, building up to the sincerity and the greatness and the awesomeness of being able to stand in front of Hashem with our feet together, just as a servant stands in front of the king himself, and to close your eyes and to daven, and obviously to read inside the words, and to feel like an eved, avda kameh malka, like a servant is standing in front of the king. That's why we're not allowed to wink, obviously not talk, other parts of the tefillah as well, but it's only like complete bitul, complete selflessness. So we build up till Shmona Esrei, and then afterwards we do the Tachanun, not now because we're still in the middle of Nisan. But then we have the Ashrei Uvalat Zion, and then the Shir Shal Yom, and then Enkel Elokeinu and Aleinu. So that's we're landing afterwards. So it's the way that our Chachamim built the concept of tefillah is leading up to the Shmona Esrei, and then landing afterwards. So the more we understand and appreciate Hashem's awesomeness, that prepares us for standing in front of Hashem. So this is why we say that tefillah, Ezo hi avodah shebalev zu tefillah. In other words, I'm just trying to bring you an example where it shouldn't just be, that we have avodat Hashem, we have to feel like an eved, we have to feel like a servant and a slave to Hashem, a servant to service Hashem. But this is a practical example that we do 3 times a day. And this is a good example of where we need to be like an eved. This is why the verse that we say, usually we're not allowed to interrupt between the bracha Ga'al Yisrael and the beginning of the Shemona Esrei. But our Chachamim put in a verse from the Tehillim. Hashem sfatai tiftach. Hashem, please open my lips. Ufi yagid tehilatecha. And my mouth will say your praises. In other words, the praise should flow. What's the idea? Obviously, we have to focus and we have to open the siddur and look inside and to have the kavanah, the proper intentions. But what are we saying? That hopefully we're going to be so selfless. We're going to be almost like nothing, just standing motionless. If you look at the Rebbe in the videos when he would daven Shemona Esrei, he didn't shake like this, just standing like ka'avda kamamare, like a servant in front of Hashem, just almost like motionless, just standing there, just in front of Hashem. And this is a practical example of how we need to. We're asking Hashem, please help the words flow through my mouth. I just want to stand here. Hashem sfatai tiftach, ufi yagid tilatecha. Yagid is like a nahar, like a river which flows. That's the word. That's the meaning. It doesn't mean doesn't just mean to say, but it means that your praises should flow through my mouth, almost as if I don't have to make any effort. Just let it come. And the same thing is right at the end of the Shemona Esrei. There's one paragraph after the last bracha, Elokai Nitzar. What do we say? V'nafshi ka'afar lakol tiyeh, petach libi b'toratecha. There are a few prayers. There are a few statements in that last paragraph. And it seems to be as if it's just an individual thing. V'nafshi ka'afar lakol tiyeh. May my soul be like dirt. And also open up my heart to your Torah. It sounds like 2 different things. But in Chassidus it says that these 2 statements are adjacent because they're connected. When we realize that our souls can be to you, Hashem, ke'afar, like dust. In other words, we're still following along these lines of being this thread that we're being batel, we're being selfless, we're being like an eved. If my soul will be like afar, like dust, then p'tach libi b'toratecha. Then naturally you will open up my heart for your Torah. A secret for us davening to Hashem and learning to Hashem is not the I. Rather, how can I be more selfless? How can I be more dedicated to you? How could I be more committed to you and move myself a little bit out of the picture and let Hashem shine into our lives? Not to interfere too much into Hashem's plan. Not even to convince ourselves that we make any plans or that we have any control. Because we just have to allow ourselves to be a funnel through which Hashem can shine into our world. So let's hope, Ezrat Hashem, in summary of today's lesson, that we will try our best to try to do avodat Hashem, sincere avodah, like the Alter Rebbe says, avodah shlema, a complete and sincere avodah, whether it's through davening with more kavana or doing mitzvahs. But the main point is to remember that Hashem, He is the one in charge, and we are just flowing along and hopefully davening to Hashem that we should be able to do the proper, Hashem's proper intention that He had in mind with us doing these mitzvot. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to